Welcome to Anita Talks Genealogy and History. I'm glad that you all are here. I hope that you can get something out of the videos. This particular video is about policing here in the United States of America. And the reason that I feel that it's important is because it's a part of the history. Like, I like to talk about history. I like to talk about things that created the situations that we find ourselves in today. So please like, subscribe, share this video. And if you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to share that as well in the comments section. Today, I'm talking about a book that I wrote. It's called A Nation of Flaws JustUs in Homeland. And the reason that I wrote that book in 2015 is because of all the killings that were going on. If you can remember around that period, that it was Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, it was Oscar Grant. It was so many young people being killed by police that, it was heavy on my heart. And the reason that it was really heavy on my heart is much closer. My grandson, 19-year-old Kerry Baxter Junior, was shot and killed in East Oakland on January the 16th, 2011. He was unarmed. He was lured down to the park in East Oakland by an ex-girlfriend and another lady, and beaten, chased, and then shot in the back through the heart, and he died. So that was devastating to me. That's my oldest grandson and the oldest grandchild that I was really around. So I was devastated by his murder. And in the beginning, I tried to work. I thought I was working with the police and then found out they were hostile. And then began listening to what was being said about the situation surrounding my grandson and that ex-girlfriend, and how the police were trafficking her. I didn't find that out till several years later when there was a big scandal about it. And I remember the last time I had spoken to my grandson, and he told me that the Oakland Police were harassing him every time that he stepped out of his mother's house. They would pull him over. If he was with his girlfriend, they would pull him over and take the car. So it had to be more than one policeman that was doing this. Take the car with the girl in it. And then she would show up later. He was living with his mother, because that would have been a clear, that would have been an indication that something was way off for that to continue to happen. And so, the last time I spoke to him, and he was telling me that, and he also told me that they had taken his ID, the Oakland Police had taken his ID, that the Oakland Police would often harass him and say, "Aren't you Kerry Baxter Senior's son?" And my son, Kerry Baxter Senior, is incarcerated. And he was set up. He was lied on. He was unjustly and wrongfully convicted and has been in prison over 23 years now. And in 2011, he had been gone like 10 years. But my grandson was 10 years old when they came and took him. They actually took him from the house where he was staying. They took my grandson from the house where he was staying. They would go to the house looking for my son and harass, the children. They went to my grandson's school. pulled him out, put him in a police car when he was 10 years old, shackled him, and left him sitting there. You know, so this is what he remembered of the police and the continued harassment. At that time, they were living in Berkeley, and they had to go through the trial of him being accused of something that he did not do. Um, and then to have him sentenced to basically a life sentence, 66 years to life. Okay. And what he was accused of was second-degree murder for someone that he wasn't even around. The guy that he's accused of killing was up the street, almost 2 blocks from where my son and this younger man were arguing, because my son at that time in 2002 was 31 years old. He wasn't young. He was working. He was a carpenter in the carpenters union. He was a journey level carpenter, making good money. And this young man had assailed him, had, approached him and told him he wanted to talk to him. And then they went down the street because they were sitting in a bar. They went down the street and the young man pulled out a gun and shot at my son and missed him. And then my son pulled out a gun. Yes, and he shot him in the foot. He didn't aim it at his heart. He didn't aim it at his brain. He shot him. And the reason that he stated was because he wanted to stop him from shooting at him. And when he shot him in the foot, the young man turned and ran towards where this victim was standing up the street. And my son ran in the opposite direction. And so he runs up the street and, makes a right before he gets to the bar where the man was standing. That's the young man. And he runs, down the other street. In the meantime, according to witnesses, a drive-by shooter came by in the car. They described the car to the T and who was in it, how many people was in it, and shot in the direction of the victim. And the man who was outside the bar smoking fell to the ground. And they called the ambulance, but while they were waiting on the ambulance, he was bleeding. He was, but he was still alive when they took him to the hospital. And but he died, on the table. And this is the man that my son was accused of killing, second-degree murder. He was also accused of attempted murder of the young man who had shot at him. And the reason they said that was because they gave the young man blanket immunity to testify against my son during his trial, so that no evidence about this guy's record, like he was 21, but he was on probation in another county, wasn't even supposed to be in Oakland. And he was on probation in another county. So he had a record of, pulling guns, of mugging people, of assaulting people, including his girlfriend, his living girlfriend. Okay? So none of that was allowed to go to court. None of it. And so the officer who testified just lied. They said my son was a drug dealer. They said my son was what they say, a gang member. They said my son was unemployed. That all of those was lies. He lived in Berkeley. This happened in Oakland. Why would a gang member travel to another city, to be in a gang? Makes no sense. He's never been accused of being a gang member, or has he ever been a gang member? But that, the officers, were able to give that to the all-white jury, and they accepted it, and they threw the book at him because my son refused to accept a 40-year plea for something he didn't even do. They wanted him to take a plea. And they said, if you don't take a plea, we're coming after you. We're going to throw the book at you. So they made sure to pick an all-white jury and told all kinds of lies and, but this is my son. And they were also harassing me because I was supporting my son, because I believed that he was innocent, And so I was surprised. My son has been gone 23 years. And I've been fighting for his, along with other people in the community, for his freedom, for him to get justice, to get a fair hearing, a fair trial with all of the evidence. And in the meantime, not knowing that they were harassing my grandson, his son, in Oakland, because his son lived in Oakland with his mother, but there was also other people, his grandmother, and they were all in Oakland. And he would be, visiting them. He'd be playing in the streets, and he said they were harassing him. And he said that one time the cop put his finger up to his head like a gun and pulled the trigger and told him, I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you. But this is what happens daily in our communities all across the United States. And so that night, or the next morning when I got the call, I just could not believe it. I could not fathom that I was never ever going to see my grandson again, And then when I began, investigating and finding out that the girlfriend, by the time we got to his mother's house, after we found out about my grandson's murder, the girlfriend was already back from the police. She didn't have any blood on her. She didn't seem traumatized. And she didn't say where she had been. She was one of the witnesses to his murder, according to her. And then she had called, she was harassing him into taking her down to the park. And then she said, oh, me and my friend. And then she called his friend, and both of them, and my grandson's mothers, gave him the key to the car, and he took them down to that park. And that park at the time, and still to this day, is known as a place where prostitutes go, where young girls are trafficked. And several years after his murder, there was a big scandal with the Oakland Police Department trafficking young girls at that same location where my grandson was murdered. And also the witnesses there said that what I'm going to say is this. This was a Sunday night. He took those girls down to the park, and he would stand, and they just said, wait for us. Take us to the park and wait for us. And he said, and he took them there, and he was waiting. And the girlfriend said that this other woman that was with her, that he had taken down there, got on the phone and called, and two black men dressed in black came and beat Kerry up, my grandson. And Kerry got away from them and ran around a corner in front of a church, San Antonio's church. And the neighbors saw my grandson running, and he was weaving, like he was running in the streets. He weaving because they were shooting at him, and the weaving just really tore my heart up, because I remember having him when he was like 10 or 11 at the fairgrounds, and somebody started shooting, and we were running. And I told my grandson, I said, weave, bend down and weave. And so when they said, oh, he's weaving, he was running, he was weaving, I remembered that I had told him, if you're running and somebody's shooting, to weave. And it didn't save him. And he, he was hit on the street in front of in front of San Antonio church on a Sunday night, and he died in front of that church. And it's still hard for me to think about him dying on that sidewalk alone. And the the priest of the church later told me that he had left, and he said that he came back and he was trying to give my grandson last rites, and the police had yellow tape around and wouldn't let them give him last rites. And he said that there's two other churches within, one on one corner to the right and across the street, and the other one down the street. So there were three pastors there, three ministers, wanting to give my son last rites. And the police, Oakland Police, would not allow my grandson to get last rites. And that hurt, that he was laying there by himself and he passed. And the neighbors told me that sidewalk was littered with shell casings. That's how much they were trying to kill my baby when he was running. And they said that they left his body there like for 4 or 5 hours, laying on the ground. And there was a big black van by his body. So what was that big black van? Why didn't they call the medics? And so when I heard it, it just, and I ran out of my apartment. And another thing that was taking place was like that evening around 1 a.m., there was banging on my door. I didn't live in Oakland. I lived way outside of Oakland. And they were just banging. And so I was not going to answer the door at that time of night. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I lived by myself. And I said, well, if they keep banging, I'll just call 911. And then it stopped. And so I went back to bed. And then the call came around 3 a.m. about him being dead. And his mother said, they killed him. They shot him through the heart. They killed him. Kerry Junior's dead. And it just was interesting to me that she didn't say he was shot, like you would say if it was a stranger. She said they, like she knew. And anyway, so, we began the ritual of meeting with family. And that's when I saw the girl who had, the one that had asked him to take her to the park, and she was sitting up there. And his aunts, my grandson had some young aunts, like, they were teenagers at the time. Not much older than him. I mean, he was 19, but they were like in their early 20s. They weren't teenagers. But they went after the girl, and they said, called her B and said, what the F did you take him down to that park for? What's wrong with you, E? I mean, they were just all over her. And the mother, my grandson's mother, told them to leave her alone. And but I noticed that she didn't have any blood on her, but she sat up and said, I held him while he died. And yet none of her clothes had blood on them. None of them. And where has she disappeared to? Because she showed back up. And we still don't know where she was. And the other lady that went with them had disappeared. They, the police claimed they were looking for her. And I don't know if they ever found her. But there were two women with my grandson that lured him down to that park. And that was a place that, any, you would not want to go. He went there because he was trying to do a favor to someone who did not have his best interest at heart. And at the same time that he was begging them, they were begging him. His friends were there and they said, Kerry, come with us. Don't go nowhere with them people. He was supposed to go to another place, to Union City, with his friends, which was in the opposite direction. And, but he, decided he would do a favor. And he winds up deceased. And so this is, what happened. And his case is still cold. His case went almost immediately cold and is still cold. And believe me, if that happened to my grandson, it's happening to other unsolved murders of our people, of our young men and women in Oakland. They know they're the ones in charge of the investigation. They're the ones that let it go cold. And it has remained cold, even with 2 witnesses. Okay? So this is my reasoning of I became an activist and I started meeting so many families of young people who were murdered, Black and brown people, going to marches, going to protests, going to sit with the families and seeing them grieving and grieving with them. And that's why I wrote this book, A Nation of Flaws JustUs in the Homeland. And it's about the history of them policing us, of those folks policing the Black and brown community, and how it began with the Native American, the indigenous people to these lands. They brought over their military after colonization, and they were welcome to this land. They brought their military, their guns, their weapons of destruction. And they began policing the Native population. And I don't believe that the natives knew they were being policed. I don't believe they knew how vicious and dangerous their enemy was, or that they were their enemy. Because when they realized that, it was already too late. They began policing, they began killing, they began removing the Native people off the land so that they could claim the land. And they would do it through assimilation, paper genocide. Like in my case, my ancestors were redesignated from Indian or Native, or their tribal names were removed, and they were redesignated mulatto. They were forced to convert to Christianity. They either became Catholics, Methodists. Some of them in my family were Quakers, or whatever, Anglican, and the church, Episcopal. Those were the Anglican and Episcopal were the first ones in Virginia to begin converting my ancestors. And sometimes they would convert them through some kind of forced marriage, usually a European man and a Native woman, it had more to do with them taking the land than a true marriage. Okay. So but they needed the police. So what they had in the beginning was what they call church wardens. So the church wardens were could arrest. They could go through their parish. They still have parishes too, and they controlled the parish like the Episcopalians controlled a parish. There was no other churches there. The Anglicans controlled the parish, so that in Lancaster County, Virginia, they cut it up, where the native tribes were. They cut the tribes up. Half of the tribe was in Northumberland County, and half was in Lancaster. So the Northumberland County ones were forced into Episcopal, to become Episcopalian, and the Lancaster County ones were forced to join the Anglican Church, and not only did they have to join, they had to pay tithes. It was against the law for them not to pay tithes. They paid tithes in tobacco and corn. And I know this because one of my ancestors back in the early 1700s was arrested by the church warden for not attending church and for not paying tithes. And the punishment was that he had to bring in 9 hogsheads of tobacco. That was the punishment. Okay. So these are laws. These are laws. And they would make laws, and then they would have their what would you say? Wardens. They would have their church militia going out in the community, arresting people, and put them on trial. The church would put them on trial. Okay. And this was a part of the formation of what is now the Americas. It was going on all over the Americas, in South America too. They put their laws ahead of the laws that were here for at least 20,000 years. So, so in the Nation of Flaws, I speak about that and about how the laws evolved, how it evolved when they started really bringing in slaves, because before they started bringing in so-called African slaves, they were enslaving the natives, especially if you was a dark native. They were enslaving them. They were redesignating them. When I said paper genocide, I mean racially redesignating them to make sure that they did not come back and claim the land that they were stealing from the original people of these lands. Okay, so it started with that, and then it morphed, and as the slaves came in, they started having the slave catchers, and the bounty hunters. This is how their laws evolved, and their laws involved them having weapons, and those of us, the black and brown people, they were hunting down, not having a weapon. So they begin to make laws that only protects them. That's when they started all that. They make a law, and they're not under the law. You're under the law. They have to do something 10 times worse to be prosecuted than what we black and brown people have to do. And then they said that like they say, that our word means nothing against theirs. That's probably still true today. Like their word is law. Do you get it? Folks, I think, like watching Trump, and his administration skirt the laws and get away with stuff that our loved ones would be in jail for 20 years for. Do you see who's above the law? That these laws that they're making don't apply to them? You know, this is what is happening right now. They control the Supreme Court and they're laughing because they told us what was going to happen. You know, so you know, the justices that are up there, they're also above the law, by the way. So they can say or do anything they want to. Nobody's going after them. Okay, so as things progress, you know, the Civil War came, and after the Civil War, you know, when so many free blacks and so many slaves fought and were fighting for an end to slavery, and white folks was fighting about money, who was going to get the money, what's going to happen after the, you know, Civil War, you know. Not saying they all did. Maybe there were some that really did want to end slavery, but not as bad as the people who were enslaved and the other blacks who could potentially be enslaved. So that ended, and then they made new laws after that to, you know, like you know, adding amendments that saying that you are, you know, you're free unless, you know, you get arrested, and then all your rights are taken away. You know, you can't be a slave unless you're arrested, and they take all your rights away. They have never, to my knowledge, they have never, to my knowledge, done that to any of theirs. And what I mean by any of theirs, I don't mean white folk. I'm talking about those folks, the, you know, the 10%ers. It never applies to them. They make up new words just to talk about, just to make sure that that it doesn't apply to them. Like this young man who killed 4 people. He was driving and under the influence, and he killed 4 people. And they made up a word called affluenza to keep him out of prison because his parents were so affluent, had so much money that it wasn't his fault that, you know, he was driving under the influence or something stupid like that. But they do it all the time. You know, this is what happens here in America, or excuse me, the United States of America, which I can only speak for since this is where I live, you know. And you know, so, you know, and then we go to Jim Crow with all the lynchings and bombings of churches, you know, and all of what was going on in the South and the North, you know. None of them have, you know, were held accountable for lynchings because it would have been the whole entire community. They had the women and children and the men there at the lynchings where they lynched men, women, and children. And then not only that, they would have the death penalty, and there were children that were electrocuted, you know, sentenced to death for things they didn't even do, just because they enjoy seeing people suffering. But at the slightest bit of suffering for them, it is weeping and moaning and poor me. But we have to pick ourselves up and we have to keep on moving. You know, we don't have the luxury that they do of the making themselves always look like victims after they set up a situation, an intolerable, abusive, demonic situation where you're killing children I mean, just look at what's going on in Palestine. And people, there are certain people that will sit and say, oh, that's none of our concern. Like the Americans here, the United States is not giving weapons to uh, Netanyahu. Like this is just an accident or something that does not concern us. The same thing is going on in the Sudan. You just don't hear about it. It's going on in the DRC. You just don't hear about it. It was going on in the Sahel until Ibrahim Traore showed up and stood up and started, started cleaning up, making a country free for his people, the land of the upright people. And I love that phrase. Someday we will be the land of the upright people. And so they, so their laws here have to do with weapons. It has to do with preserving white supremacy. That's my opinion. We live in a white male patriarchal society. And that means that they're those folks at the top, it's racist, and they will pick some of us that look like us if they have that mindset. If they know their place, then they're welcome at the table. And if they, look at people who hardly know what they're doing, who are causing so much suffering to their own people, not just to the, Black and brown people, but causing so much suffering. And you support that. You're sitting at the table with them. You're one of the boys, or rather you have your temporary white card or whatever. And, so even with all that, with all the laws favoring their side, things just don't go the way they want them to go, because they're forgetting, calling themselves a Christian country, which to me is blasphemy. If you call yourself a Christian country and you're doing everything the opposite of what Christ would do, that's blasphemy. You're a liar. You're killing children and women. You're destroying the earth, polluting the earth. You're dropping bombs. You're stealing. You're liars. And you think that you're a Christian rapist? And but hey, that's your journey. I'm not on your journey. And anybody that wants to follow that, good luck to you. But I would not align myself with that type of a person or that mentality. And nobody is perfect. We're not saying that people are perfect, but the dark stuff that goes on, the pedophilia, the raping, the incest, and just the wickedness that goes on, and people know it in the community, and whisper about it, but they're not going to do anything about it. So it just, like when you say you're a Christian, it's just a joke. It's a big joke when you say that. And because if you're living that life, you don't even have to say it. Everyone will know that's a good person, that's a Christian, or that's a good person, that's a Muslim, or that's a Jewish person, that's a good person. People know. And you can't say I'm this religion and you'd assume that everybody that's that religion is following the tenets of the religion. which are supposed to be, my belief is based on some kind of spirituality or some kind of deity or belief in something higher. But you know, hey, you all do you, but just don't, leave us out of it. We don't want to be a part of you know, your destruction. You're destroying yourself, you know. Um, so, to support um, the killings that are going on, which, they started out going from country to country and killing off the indigenous people for their land. And then they wound up building militaries and going and just um, going anywhere they went to in the world, bombing people and taking their mineral wealth. And they've done a very good job of that in Africa. So, this is where the laws, are, have gone from America to be talking about America as a superpower. But how did you get that power? You know, who did you kill? Whose land did you steal? Whose mineral wealth are you coveting? Um, you know, in order to, you know, bring about some uh, domination. You're not God. You'll never be God. You know, you may or may not see him at, when it's time for you to pass. But excuse me, see God, creator, not him or her, but creator, the spirit. So this is, why I wanted to share this with you. And in this book, I not only talk about the murders of our young people, um, Mike Brown Jr., um, I talk about Tamir Rice, I talk about um, Oscar Graham, I talk and other young people who were murdered whose stories did not make the headlines. And I also made a connection between what they do to the murders, when our children are killed, how they are treated. In fact, how they are killed versus how the serial killers, the spree killers, the mass murderers who were predominantly white males, they can get a chance, they can go and kill numerous of people and still be taken in alive. Many of them are sitting in prison right now, you know, serving triple life sentences, but not death, triple life sentences. And in the meantime, while they're sitting there, they're making documentaries. They're getting money and their families are getting monies. There's a Green River killer who killed at least 48 women and counting, and they gave him life in prison, or maybe they gave him several lives in prison. But they have the death penalty. They did not give him the death penalty. And they said, oh, we're going to keep him alive because there might be other victims. We want him to tell us where they are. That have, there was a Michael Williams who was executed and in Missouri. And they're not even sure that he killed the woman that he's accused of killing, but they executed him. One woman, unsubstantiated evidence, but they gave him the death penalty. But yet here's a white man up, in somewhere in either Oregon or Washington, Spokane or somewhere up there, and they're keeping him alive because he might have other bodies out there that he's going to tell them about, and they've done that numerous of times with these white men who are serial killers. And then they say, oh, these people are so intelligent. And I mean, they made Criminal Minds because they want to write stories about these white serial killers. they glorify him. They glorified, you know, Charles Manson, even though Charles Manson himself didn't kill anybody, but they glorified him and his followers. And but they will stop a Black young man at a traffic stop. They will shoot and kill him because they feared for their life. You know, they would go into a house and kill a Black woman in her own house because they feared for their life. But they have no problem allowing these white males to live after they've killed at least 5 people. That's I think is what a serial killer is, you know. But we're not even talking about the ones that kill their whole families and they take them in alive. Um, so this is why I felt the need to write about a nation of flaws, just us in a homeland. And I hope you enjoy this. I would like to, hear from you guys. And thank you for the support so much. I hope you will like and subscribe. And I hope you will share this video and also comment. And otherwise, I will see you guys out there.